Hey guys, it's Kevin and my review for the latest Amazon miniseries from Nicholas Winding Refn, of course being Too Old to Die Young. So what Too Old to Die Young is essentially about is we center on this character, Martin Jones. He is this typical LAPD cop. He's kind of corrupted and things like that. But basically, he ends up witnessing his partner getting shot. And basically, the rest of the show is him, of course, trying to find the person that did it and hopefully track him down, but also getting himself entangled in this underworld of hitmen and things like that, and having to take down all these people, but also hopefully completing his vengeance, and that's really all I'm going to say. So, Too Old to Die Young, I was very excited for this series. I mean, Nicholas Winding Refn, yes, he is a very, very strange and out there director for sure, but you know what? That's why I love him so much. I love how he's always pushed boundaries. I've loved the stories that he's told, and I have yet to see something from him that I do not love. You know, Bronson, Neon Demon, I finally watched Drive this year. Such an incredible film. And Refn, I mean, he just outdoes himself every single time, and that's one of the things I just love about him. He's a director that goes for it, and I was very excited to see what he was going to do for a TV show, because there's so much more room that you can explore there. There's so much more stuff that you can do with that, and I was looking forward to seeing how this show would turn out. You know, it had Miles Teller, an actor that I very much do respect. The plot sounded really compelling to me, and I will say this, while Too Old to Die Young does have some aspects of things that I really do love from Refn's previous work, it is easily the weakest thing I have ever seen from him. This show definitely has some great ideas, but overall just did not really live up to its potential, and honestly really did disappoint me. But we're just getting to right now, starting off with the cast. And that's one of the areas that didn't disappoint me. There are quite a few things that I really was let down by with this show, but the acting, for the most part, I thought was fairly consistent. I mean, Miles Teller, what is there to say about this guy that hasn't been said before? He's one of the best actors working today, but here he's playing a much different role than you'd expect. Martin Jones is not the type of character that Miles Teller would usually play. This is not someone who is a big personality. This is not someone who is like comedic relief or something like that. No, this guy is very stoic, and he's very quiet, and he's almost emotionless, but the way that Teller goes about it, he really does elevate this character, and he does some really great work here for sure. He is purposefully reserved, and I thought he did a really great job in this role. He has some really great standout scenes. Martin does go through a pretty big shift as a character, and I really did like what Teller ended up doing here for sure. He was a highlight throughout, and I really did love him here. And the same goes for Augusto Allegra. Sorry if I'm pronouncing his name wrong, but he plays the character of Jesus, and Jesus is basically the man that shot Martin's partner, and he, I thought, was also fantastic. He does some really great stuff throughout the show. I think he has some really great monologues and things like that, and this is a character that on paper could have been really one-note and could have been really problematic, but the way that Aguilera really gets you to sort of understand and also kind of justify his actions, I think is really interesting, and I really do love what he was able to do here. I think he did some great work throughout the show, and I thought overall he definitely did a really great job. Someone else who was a huge standout for me, and probably the most surprising performance of the entire show, was Christina Rob Lowe. Now, I have not seen anything from her before. Same with Augusto Allegra, but she blew me away. This character, I don't want to say too much about her, but she plays this character, Yuritsa. She starts off as this sex worker, and she definitely is not someone you want to mess with. I mean, wow, this character is all kinds of crazy. She is badass, but she also is someone that you really do care about. And I thought overall she had some really great work throughout the show. She does have dialogue, but not a ton of dialogue, and a lot of her best scenes she's able to convey without dialogue, and I really did love what she was able to do here. The chemistry between her and Augusto Allegra especially, I think, is very strong, and I really did love where she ended up going as well. I thought she was a standout throughout. As far as the rest of the cast goes, everyone else does a really great job. John Hawkes, I mean, he's always great, but he definitely does a very good job as a character of Vigo. I definitely really liked him here. Jena Malone, I also thought definitely did a really good job. William Baldwin, this role, I mean, he does a really great job, but wow, does he go to some weird places. I mean, just the places that this character goes, the fact that he's willing to go there, I mean, hats off to him, because he definitely gives a very memorable performance for sure. The only performance in the show that did not work for me is that of Nell Tiger Free. Now, she plays this character, Janie. She is Martin's love interest. She's the 17-year-old girl that he's dating, and I just did not think she was very good. Now, everyone else, yes, there is a stoicism and very quiet sort of performance, you know, that's purposeful for a show like this. But with her, she just seemed really stiff and uncomfortable, and I just did not really like her here very much at all. A lot of the time, it felt like she was reading off a script. Her and Teller have absolutely no chemistry whatsoever. You don't buy their relationship one bit. That might be the point, but Free does not really do much to show why Janie would take an interest in him, and I just did not think that she was very good here at all. And, you know, she had, like, a small role in Game of Thrones and things like that, but this is the first time I've really seen her as, like, a main role, and I just don't think she's a very strong actress. I mean, maybe I have to see her in other things, but as in terms of this show, I just did not think she was very good. Everyone else, though, is very good. Everyone definitely gives a very memorable performance for sure, and it's definitely one of the best things about this show. So now let's get to the directing and the writing, which I'm sorry to say is the weakest part of this entire show. And I usually really do love Nicholas Winding Refn, but something about his directing here, it just didn't really work here. Now, look, not the entire show. I do think that the tone for the show is correct. It's very dark. It's very brooding. It's very raw. He does a very good job with that for sure. And he also tries to throw in some bits of levity, some like really dark comedy, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But I thought overall, like tonal-wise, he definitely did a good job. But his style is really the problem here. I feel like his style, he has a very specific style for his movies, and most of the time it really works. But this was one of those cases where I really feel like it got in the way. This whole thing feels very self-indulgent. It honestly does feel quite pretentious at times, and that really is due to Refn's directing. I feel like he had a really great idea here, but his style just got in the way of it. But then getting into the writing, look, there are things that the show is trying to say, and it definitely does tell a story in a sense, but that really gets into my biggest issue with this show, is that the story in general is a bit unclear. I mean, the idea of Martin becoming this hitman and things like that, and him having to kill different people, and then Jesus kind of going on this, you know, revenge path and seeing how he got there. Yeah, that stuff is interesting, but the show does not dive into what you think it's going to. Martin's partner, for example, you know, his police partner that's killed, it's only brought up in that episode. After that, they never talk about him again. Like, that's it. And that can really throw people off. It definitely threw me for a loop, for sure. And for that reason alone, I can totally understand why someone is going to check out of this show. And I'm going to be honest with you, for a while, I wasn't like that. I mean, the show is definitely very slow-paced, and it can get nauseatingly slow at points, particularly when it's focusing on a character that isn't Martin. It's interesting, but the show really plays up the style over there. The show really plays up its style when it's focusing on a character that isn't Martin. It really just turns into something completely different, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. For example, my favorite episode of this entire show really has nothing to do with the main plot. It's just Martin going on the side mission, and he is killing some really bad people. I don't want to say too much more, but it's fantastic. And that alone is a great standalone film. But that runs into another issue with the show, is that it just is not very well paced. Story-wise, it's just hard to tell where the show is really going. It's hard to tell where we're really headed at points. It feels like the show forgets what its actual central conflict is, because it'll introduce things, and you'll think, okay, this is going to tie into it, but then it's not, and you're kind of just left there sitting like, what was the point of this then? Why did this happen if, you know, it wasn't going to connect? It doesn't really make a lot of sense, and I don't think it connected quite as well as it did. And then character-wise as well, I do think there are some good characters here. Martin as a character is definitely very interesting, because like I said, he starts off as this very crooked cop. He's very much on the wrong side of things. He seems to be headed down a very dark path. He is, of course, like I said, dating a 17-year-old girl, so that right there is a red flag. And the way they go about this character, it's really showing the darkness within someone and how this can fully corrupt them and make them, lose sight of themselves, and eventually how that has to sort of catch up with him. That stuff is really interesting. And same with Jesus, his character. I also really like, because you'd think maybe he's like the hero of the story because, what happened to him. I'm not going to get into it too much, but his mom was killed by, these cops, and he has been vowing revenge for a while, and I think they do a very good job with showing how revenge it can consume someone, it can make them lose sense of themselves. That is a very good message, and when the show is trying to tap into that, it does a really great job with it. And look, these are themes we've seen Refn tackle before. The idea of vengeance, the idea of just revenge and how it can have a damaging effect on someone. We've seen these things before, but the show does an excellent job with diving into that stuff, and that's something I definitely really do enjoy about it for sure. And I think that's definitely when it is at its strongest, is when it's diving into that stuff. The problem is, that's not all this show is trying to say. There's about a million other sort of themes and things like that that come up, and it just makes it very confusing. It makes it very hard to see what theme Refn was truly trying to latch onto, until really, I'd say, the last, like, 2 episodes of the show, when he kind of just spells it out for you. And that definitely bothered me for sure, and I don't think that was very well done either. So like I said, we do have some good characters here, but they're just not delved into as much as they should. These arcs that we have with them, while they are interesting, we needed a lot more going on there. Because sure, it is thrilling to see Martin go out and becoming this hitman and, killing all these different people. It is definitely very exciting. It's something that you are interested in seeing where his character is going to go. But after a while, it just feels kind of repetitive. And the same goes for Jesus' character. After a while, it just feels repetitive. And again, this being a 10-episode series, I think it really does hurt the show for sure, and I think they definitely did not do a very good job with that either. I will say the character of Yuritsa, where she ends up going, is probably the only satisfying character arc of this entire show. Out of everyone this season, when it comes to Yuritsa, she's the only character where I'm like, yeah, that character ended in a place that I'm satisfied with. That character ended in a place that I think is actually really great, and I like where they're going with her as a character. But everyone else, it feels very stagnant. It feels like they're missing, arcs. Martin doesn't really go through that much of an arc. He starts off as a corrupted cop, and he ends the show almost just as corrupted. He ends the show in a place where it's all starting to catch up to him. And then you have someone like Jesus, where Jesus ends up going as a character. And these characters, they just do not end as satisfying as they could have, and I think that definitely does hurt the show as well. And not all the characters are even really that great. There are 2 characters in particular that I think are kind of terrible. One of them is Jena Malone. She starts off and she is with this character of Vigo, played by John Hawkes, who is this other criminal that at first you think Martin is going after, but then he kind of he starts to ally with him. And where this character Diana ends up going at first, she's sort of like the, sort of kindred spirit to Vigo. She has a very similar motivation to what he's doing. But then where they take her, it just felt extremely pretentious, and it came right out of left field, and it just seemed like they love Jena Malone as an actress. Refn loves working with her, that he wanted to give her something really juicy, and it just didn't really work here at all. I don't really think that was very well done. But easily the weakest character in this entire show has to be Janie. Look, like I already talked about Nell Tiger Free, and now I really don't think she's that great. But her character is a different story. Her character is absolutely nothing. She's just simply the girlfriend to Martin. She is sort of grieving over her mother, but that's not really even dived into all that much. And she seems to be okay with the fact that they're a couple, and that's kind of it. She smokes a lot. And that's really all we know about her. He lingers on for it a little too bit. She's just such a flat character, and a lot of the show does focus on their relationship. It's kind of contingent upon I think you'll sort of caring about them, and they don't do a lot of very good job with that at all. I did not think that she was far too often interesting character. It doesn't seem to that definitely does hurt the show. You know, her father, on the other hand, played by William Baldwin, like I said, a very interesting role for him for sure. Very, very strange character. You know, they're definitely trying to allude to like certain figures in the media that are like this, the way he acts towards his daughter. Definitely there's a lot of people out there that are very much like this, but he's just a very strange character for sure. Where he ends up going, it feels like that was the intent, but it also kind of doesn't. I mean, I don't know, it's a very weirdly written show. I don't really know how to explain it that well, but it's not very well written. Now, I know I've been very negative towards the show, but I will say towards the second half, that's when the show actually gets really good. Once they introduce the character of Vigo, and he becomes a little bit more prominent in the story, and then you kind of start to see how, like, Jesus and Yuritsa's storyline is connecting to everything, then the show gets really good. Then I actually started to get really invested in what was going on. For a while, I was just kind of sitting there like, what's really the point of all this? But then they start to connect things, and I really started to get into it. I would say episodes 4 through 8, that's when this show is at its best. That's when this show is actually something that is really worthwhile. It's telling a great story, like I said, about corruption, about revenge, about just violence, about the very cynical side of human beings, and, you know, things like that. The divide between good and the bad, being the hero and being the villain, you know, where's that gray area? Is there such a thing as a gray area? I mean, there's a lot of interesting topics that the show is trying to provoke with that stuff, and they definitely do a very good job with that for sure. And the thing is, though, you know, for a while, like I said, I was actually really enjoying it. I'm like, okay, finally, this is starting to go somewhere. This is really getting very interesting. There's a lot of things that happen in, like, episodes 5 through 7 especially that you really think are going to go somewhere. And then right when the show starts to get interesting, and that's around episode 8, really when everything, they throw everything at the wall, things are starting to converge, you think, all right, it's finally getting to its climax, it just stops. Seriously, the story just stops. It stops dead in its tracks, it completely forgets what kind of story it's trying to tell, and it just stops, and that really bothered me. I did not at all like where the show ended up going, especially in its last 2 episodes. It kind of becomes a completely different show, and you're just kind of sitting there like, why is this still going? Episode 8 feels like the end. It feels like there's nothing really left to do. I mean, sure, you could have had some things from episodes 9 and 10 at the end of 8. I'm not saying you couldn't, but the way episode 8 ends, it feels like this should be the final episode. It just doesn't really work the way it does, and again, I feel like that really is due to Refn. I feel like he just got very self-indulgent, and he wanted to do whatever he can to stretch out the story as much as possible, and it just doesn't really work here, and I think that really does hurt the show for sure, unfortunately. There are also quite a lot of plot conveniences in the last few episodes, but I was forgiving them because, again, I knew they were leading up to something. There's one that happens in episode 7. It felt incredibly out of character. I don't know why and again, I knew why they had to go in that direction to get where we did in episode 8, but it still did feel convenient, and in hindsight, there are quite a few things that do happen that I'm just kind of shaking my head at. Why were they even that important? Why'd they even happen? Why'd they even show this to us? They acted like something big was going to happen, and then it just didn't, and that really did bother me for sure. And like I said, in terms of its themes, it's a little wonky. The themes of corruption are there for sure, but then in the last 2 episodes, he tries to spell it all out for you. It seems like this whole thing is supposed to be a story about America as a nation and sort of like the shift we're undergoing, how we are in a really terrible place right now. And look, Refn has said that, you know, the area of, you know, you know, the sort of era of Trump and things like that, that really did inspire a lot of the show, and it really does show here for sure. And look, I'm not saying those things aren't important, because they absolutely are, but I just don't know if they really fit into the grand scheme of things. It feels like he just shoved this in here because he was mad at the world. He was pissed off at the way things were going, and he felt that he needed to say something about it. The problem is, I don't think it really fits into this specific narrative, and that really does deter a lot of what the show was trying to do. It feels like it's a detachment from what we were seeing before. And look, yes, a big part of the show is the divide in America. That is a big plot line throughout the entire show, but the way it handles it in the last 2 episodes, it feels so in your face. It feels so, it just feels so shoved down your throat. And that's the other thing. This show is not subtle at all. It makes it very clear what it's trying to say. And normally I would not have a problem with that. I like when a show isn't afraid to get into some really serious topics, but this show does in a way that's annoying. It does it in a way that feels like it's getting in the way of what it's trying to do. And again, I attribute that to Refn. I think in general, he just had too many ideas here, and he couldn't bog it down to just one, and I do think that very much does hurt this show for sure. So, yeah, I really was not very impressed by the writing here at all. The cinematography, though, I will say, throughout this entire show, the cinematography is absolutely gorgeous. There are so many shots in here that are just so masterfully done. There's one especially in episode 5. It involves this car chase, and I don't want to say too much more, but it is, I can confidently say that is one of the most beautiful shots I have seen in any piece of media this year. Film, TV, you name it. It's stunning. I love the way that was done, and that's something that Refn has always done very well. He recognizes great cinema, and he's trying to make this feel as cinematic as possible, and I really do admire that. I love the style of this show. There are so many incredible shots, and I think he does a very good job of that. And the same goes with the score. Cliff Martinez is an inspired composer, and this is easily some of the best work I've seen from him. It's very eerie. It has that sort of 80s feel that we've come to know, and it is ear-piercing. I mean, it really does set the tone for what the show is trying to do. It elevates a lot of scenes, and I think overall, the score was such a highlight throughout this entire thing. And if there was a soundtrack, I mean, I don't know if there is, but if there is a score, like, say, on Spotify or Apple Music or something, I definitely want to listen to it, because I definitely really did love Cliff Martinez's score here. The editing, though, is my other big problem with this show. Look, the show is 10 episodes long, as I said, but it also happens to be almost every episode is like movie length. There are episodes that clock in at like an hour and 30 minutes. There are episodes that clock in at an hour and 20 minutes, and I get it that he was, you know, you could say, okay, good, you know, on one hand, you could say, okay, this is good, he's getting as much mileage out of these characters as possible, but that's not what he's doing. There are so many scenes in this show that could easily be cut. There's a whole sequence with William Baldwin, just in the first episode alone, and I was just kind of sitting there like, what the fuck is this? Like, what am I watching? What is the point of any of this that is going on right now? There are tons of scenes with Yuritsa and Jesus, especially in the last few episodes of this show, that just linger on, and it just becomes nauseating after a while. This show is very poorly paced. There honestly is not a single, there's almost no episode of this show that I can think of that is really well paced. I feel like every episode has this problem. Maybe only like episodes 5 and 6 were the only ones to me that didn't have this issue. But even at that, there is, actually now that I'm thinking, but there is a scene in episode 6 where I'm like, why'd this go on so long? Like, there's so many scenes where it's just like, you know what cutting is, right? You know what editing is about. You know what that's for. It seems like Refn didn't really care. He was just kind of like, yeah, we'll play that out for as long as possible. And it feels like he wanted to just have a 13-hour TV show. He wanted to make sure this was 13 hours, so he stretched it out as much as possible, and it really does show here. And honestly, I never say skip scenes, but there are scenes in the show you can skip. There are scenes that go on far too long, and if it gets nauseating and you want to turn it off, I completely understand it, because there are episodes like that for me for sure. And while I definitely enjoyed, like I said, episodes 4 through 8 of this show, I can't deny there were many points where I was just kind of sitting there like, why am I watching this? Like, there's other things I could be watching right now. This is kind of wasting my time. But again, I always thought it was going somewhere. And of course, it really kind of didn't. And that does hurt the show as well. So yeah, the editing here, it's very poorly paced. I do not like the way it's done at all. Episode 2 especially. I mean, look, there are moments in the show where shots just linger on, but episode 2 is a huge example. There are so many scenes, like in a club, and it is the slowest pan that you can think of. Not even just, probably, you could think of a slow pan. It's probably slower than that. It's like if you put every single video in, like, 0.5 speed. Like, that's how slow Refn is operating in terms of editing here, and I don't know what he's trying to do other than just exhaust the viewer completely, and it really did do that for me. It's not always like that, but there were many moments that, yeah, it took me out of it. I did not like how slow-paced it was. I usually don't have a problem when things are slow-paced, but this show is unnecessarily slow-paced, and at times it feels so lifeless, and it feels so sort of robotic in that way, and it just did not work for me here. And look, action scene-wise, there are some really great ones for sure. I mean, again, in episode 5, there is a fantastic scene involving this car chase, but it does not go where you expect it to. But I will say, even though I enjoyed quite a lot of the action sequences here, after a while, it just felt very just superfluous. It felt like they were just here to keep you invested. There's one in episode 9 that happens, and it should be really big. It is a really good scene, but it doesn't feel like it has anything to do with what's going on. It's just there to make sure that you're not falling asleep. And look, there are some legitimately great action scenes that definitely do have an impact on the plot and do work really well for sure, but quite a lot of them, they just felt very repetitive, and they just kind of felt like they were there, like I said, to just move things forward, and a lot of them did not work for me. Quite a few of them did, but there definitely were a few that I just didn't really feel much towards. I just thought, I should be feeling, this should feel really epic, and this should feel really badass, but it just didn't feel that way to me. Like, Drive, every action scene in that movie for, in comparison, every single scene feels so important. It definitely is something that needs to be there. There were quite a few sequences in here that felt like they could have easily been cut out, and I hate saying that because I think Refn does such an incredible job when it comes to action, but some of it just felt a little bit pointless here. But again, my other huge issue with the show is really the way things wrap up here, which I'm just going to get into spoilers because, look, there are things in the show that really pissed me off, and I'm just going to get right into it. So, okay, the first thing I want to talk about is Episode 8. Episode 8 is really when everything goes down. It feels like this is the moment where, so many stories are starting to converge. Jesus now knows that Martin is the one that killed his mother. It wasn't the cop that he shot. It was Martin that did it. And that is actually a really interesting place. This has been the main thing that Jesus has been doing throughout this entire show. He's been trying to figure out, who did it. He's been trying to get revenge. And the second he realizes that it's Martin, he does not hesitate. He's going to go in there and he's going to make sure that he gets the revenge. And he definitely does get revenge for sure. The problem is, this was right when things were starting to get interesting for Martin. All of his bad decisions are starting to catch up to him, especially the idea of him dating a 17-year-old girl. That's something that a lot of people weren't really questioning, especially her father, who clearly had some sort of sexual feelings for her, which was very odd. But because of characters like that, he never really had to face it, but now it seemed like he did, and they never really went anywhere with that. So to just have both of them be killed in this episode, yeah, I was a bit let down by that. Now, Martin's death, I actually did think was pretty great, with Jesus whipping him pretty much to near death, and Martin having almost no reaction to it after a while because he's just so numb at this point. And I took this as Martin has just done so so much that it's fully corrupted him of any sort of reaction. That's why he's not really reacting to it, and I think that was definitely very interesting. And then Jesus just completely mutilating him with that machete. That was an amazing sequence, and I love the way that scene was done, and it really makes you question, like, sure, Jesus is a character we should be rooting for because Martin killed his mother and he's getting that revenge, but he's also going way too far. I mean, Martin did not need to die in that way at all. I mean, he could have easily just whipped him and things like that, but no, he was not going to let him die easily. He was not going to let him die like Damien, where he just put a bullet in him. No, he was going to make sure that it was a gruesome, gruesome death, and definitely they did not hold back there. The main problem, though, is Janie. I don't know why Janie had to die, to be honest with you. There's that great scene in episode 6, where, like I said, I did not like Janie that much, but the one scene I actually did really like her in is episode 6, where Yuritsa, meets up with her, and we realize, holy shit, these two actually know each other. They interact. She talks about Martin. There's that scene where she doesn't think that Yuritsa has killed as many people as she has, so I was waiting for some kind of face-off between these two. Maybe Yuritsa recruits, her because of the fact that she is going after people that have been, sex slaves, and she doesn't want women to have to turn out like that. Maybe she takes Janie and she tries to make things better for her. She tries to give her a better life. I was thinking that they go in that direction, but no, just Janie's killed, and it just makes you question, what was the point of that scene? Why did we even have Yuritsa and Janie interact? Because in the end, it really leads to nothing, and that very much bothered me. I really thought they were going to go somewhere interesting with that, but they really didn't, and that definitely pissed me off for sure. Also, Martin killing Janie's dad. That was actually a really surprising move. I did not expect the show to go there. But as we know, Janie was looking for him. She was going to leave with Martin. She was told the last person that saw her dad was Martin. But we don't get the impression that, like, Janie knows that Martin killed him. We don't think that's a thing. Again, never comes back up. Never comes back up. There's never a moment where they're like, oh, Martin killed your father. Like, they could have done something really cool with that. Yuritsa could have, I don't know. There was more they could have done there, and I feel like that really did hurt the show for me. And her death just felt completely unsatisfying, and it's surprising that a character that I really did not care that much about, I actually did feel could have had a lot more to do and could have been a much better character if they had not killed her at that moment. If they had not killed her at that moment, I actually do think we could have gotten some potentially really good stuff out of Janie as a character, but unfortunately, that's not what happened here. There's tons of stuff with her that's just completely pointless and feels superfluous to the entire story, and I don't know why they decided to do this. I don't know why they had to kill her. It didn't even really make much sense. Like, why did Jesus kill her? Just because she was affiliated with him? I really don't understand it, but whatever. I guess it is what it is. There's not much I can do about it, but it's dumb. I really did not like the way that was handled, and I feel like there was a lot more they could have done with that character, and it really did let me down for sure. So again, Martin's death I thought was really good, but Janie's I thought was very disappointing for sure. And look, I get it that Martin was trying to settle down with Janie and things like that. They were trying to live this like quiet, idyllic life, and that there was no possible way that the show was going to end with Martin and Janie living happily together. That just wasn't going to happen. But I didn't think it would happen this soon. I did not think it would be episode 8. And in a way, it's very ballsy. But I also hate it because we have 2 episodes left, which really are nothing. The last 2 episodes of the show, they just feel like an extended epilogue. It just feels like this one last idea that Refn had. Because like I said, most of the show is exploring the idea of corruption and, sort of like the balance between the two. And where, then them sort of getting blinded by both of these, both of these lives. You have Martin, who he's, on one hand, he's a detective, but on the other hand, he's a hitman. The lines are clearly starting to blur for him. And then you have Jesus, who he's someone who he's trying to live a normal life, and he's trying to not be like his family and things like that, but he ends up becoming probably even worse than his family. So that story is really great. I love where they end up going with it, but what doesn't work is, again, those last 2 episodes. The stuff with Diana and the visions, I mean, that's probably why people keep comparing this to Twin Peaks: The Return, because of stuff like that. I mean, the show gets unnecessary, and that, when I talk about pretentious, like, the show gets unnecessarily pretentious and things like that. I don't know what that's all about. That was definitely very weird. The scene where Vigo literally makes his mom eat his own, fake eyeball, and then she dies. Like, what the hell was that? And then the stuff with Yritza and Jesus, where they're in this really weird sexual relationship where, like, she's role-playing and things like that. It's just, again, that's something you could easily cut out. Like, what's the point? Why do I keep having these long sex scenes of just Yritza and Jesus? I don't care. I really don't. It's not very, it doesn't really serve a purpose other than, I guess, it motivates Jesus. I mean, I don't really know what the point of it is. I do like where they leave Jesus, though, that he's now at a point where, he is just fully into the idea of violence. Nothing at this point. He doesn't want any sort of peace. He just wants to commit tons of violence. He wants to commit tons of just pain on the town. He wants to really unleash his wrath on all of America, and it seems like nobody really is going to stop him except for Vigo and Diana, who, as we know, they are trying to track down the rapists. They're trying to track down the people that have, that have welcomed all of this evil and things like that. But then you have Vigo killing all those, people in that trailer park, and you think, okay, maybe that's just as bad what he's doing, and I think they did a good job with that, for sure. But the last episode of this show especially felt so unsatisfying. The stuff with Diana and her just dancing through the house, again, that really lingers on. I like the last scene of Yritza killing all those guys and her basically trying to kill all the evil. But again, it just makes you question, like, why do we need these last 2 episodes? What really is the point? You could have, yes, had the scene where, maybe you have a quick scene of, like, Vigo and Diana, where Vigo realizes that Martin's not coming back, and they realize that they gotta face this together now. Maybe you have that scene with Jesus and Yritza, but at the end of the day, it just felt completely unnecessary, and it really did hurt this show for me. It was very unsatisfying. There are so many questions that just weren't answered, and look, I'm not asking for every question to be answered. I mean, hell, my favorite show of all time is The Leftovers, and there are so many questions in that show that weren't answered and purposefully weren't answered. But here, I just don't think Refn did a very good job with sticking that landing. I don't really think he did. I feel like he had a completely different idea for the last 2 episodes and just tacked them on. Episode 8, I mean, the show could have easily been 8 episodes, and I would have been fine with that. I would have been fine if they stopped at episode 8, but they don't. They keep going, and I just don't really understand why. I don't know why Refn decided to go here, and I really do think it killed his show. I hate saying it because, like I said, I really do love the guy. I've supported him in all of the films he's done and things like that, but I really do think that he hurt his own show here, and unfortunately, it really is apparent with these last 2 episodes. It made a lot of this show feel pretty pointless, and it made me feel like I wasted my time with these 10 episodes. And also, the first 9 episodes are all an hour 30, but then the last episode's like 30 minutes. Like, what? It's just, it really doesn't make any sense at all. So yeah, those things really did bother me. They really did hold the show back, and there's just a lot of things that I'm questioning what really was the point of it all. And then that moment where Jena Malone is, talking about the state of America and, oh, how, concentration camps are going to come back and things. And again, this stuff is important when she talks talks about how eventually things will be peaceful. That stuff is important, but the whole thing to me just felt like, oh, you're just spelling everything out now. You're just telling me exactly what this show is supposed to be about, and I fucking hate that. It felt very patronizing. It felt like Refn thought we were stupid, and I don't know why he went in that direction. Refn always does things in a very subtle manner, and this wasn't subtle at all, and I think that really did hurt the show for sure. And again, especially because that did not seem like the main message they were telling. That did not seem like the main sort of thing that they were trying to do, and it just did not work here at all. So overall, guys, Too Old to Die Young definitely does have some really good ideas. It has some very strong performances. It has some great moments, for sure. It has some moments from Refn that I really do love, particularly in Episode 5. They do a really great job with that, for sure. There's some dark comedy that surprisingly does work quite well, too. The score by Cliff Martinez is always a standout. The cinematography is absolutely gorgeous, but it also feels super self-indulgent. It feels like a show that really had a hard time in what it was trying to say until, like I said, those last 2 episodes where they literally spell out everything for you. And it really just makes you question what was the point of anything. There's a lot of lingering questions. There's a lot of unsatisfying things. And just overall, I feel like this was a show that could have been something really great, but Refn just had this idea, and he thought it worked, and it just does not fit in the grand scheme of things. And I think ultimately it did hurt this show for sure. So while I really did want to love the show, I have to say this was probably one of the biggest disappointments of the entire year for me. And I am going to give Too Old to Die Young overall a C. Very disappointing for sure, but you know what? Refn is definitely a talent, and he is someone that I do respect for trying to do something different, and that's something that I will definitely give him. I will always be there to support him, but this just did not work out at all for me. I know there's a lot of people that seem to be liking this one, but I don't know. This one just did not do it for me at all. But overall, guys, in my review, Too Old to Die Young, let me know what you guys thought of this miniseries overall. Left your thoughts on it. If you have seen it, definitely let me know. Look, I don't really encourage you to watch this because it is so long, and it definitely is very taxing in that way. But that's it for this video. Hope you guys enjoy. We'll see you guys in my next video, and we'll see you guys for that. Okay, bye.